I'm Aron Ra, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
Hi, welcome to Atheist Edge. I'm Courtney, here with Randall Theo. Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we just kind of wanted to talk about your background with the Boy Scouts, I guess.
Well, I had a 27-year career with the Boy Scouts, starting in 1989. I worked my way all the way through the organization professionally to be the executive director of a small council here in Texas. And along the way discovered that I wasn't really a believer, and found out that was a bit of a conflict in that organization, so I left.
So were you in Boy Scouts as a kid?
Never was a scout as a child, so found it in college as a career after I graduated.
Wow. So I guess with your experience in the Boy Scouts or in the organization, I guess was there anything that sort of stood out to you about how they operated? Well,
it seemed to be something that fit my personality well, being a part of, I loved doing things that help kids. The whole outdoor experience, teaching children about what's crawling underneath that rock, and that it all kind of fits into the same universal scheme, as opposed to, ooh, that's yucky kind of thing. Getting kids outdoors really was something that I liked and enjoyed bringing to lots of kids.
Yeah. So what role did religion play in the organization?
Well, there is no religious requirement in the Boy Scouts per se. You can pretty much get through the Scouts without earning a religious award. They're kind of a sideline issue. The only real requirement is whenever they say the oath, you have to say that you'll be willing to do your duty to God. And that has changed recently, and we'll probably get into that in a bit.
That seems pretty definitional, though.
It is, but in depending upon who sponsored your pack or troop, really determined how much religiosity was put in front of you. And let's say if it was American Legion post, they got very little religion put in front of them. But if it was the Mormon Church, you got lots and lots of religion put in front of you.
Right.
And so when you talk to Scouts, you get lots of different experiences. I get questions all the time from parents saying, oh, our troop isn't a religious troop. We don't have to, atheists can join our troop. Well, technically, no, they can't. But I can see how people would get that impression, because they may have not heard anything about religion the entire time they were in that troop.
Okay. So as a kid going through it, do you think that the kids would have gotten a religious message explicitly, like a requirement of belief? Again,
it depends upon what troop you were in.
Right,
it's very possible that you would not. But every troop has a chartering organization that sponsors it, and those troops can decide those things. So again, if the Mormon Church, and again, the Mormons are about to leave scouting, but when in their heyday, that was absolutely a part of being in the troop, as you had to also meet the church requirements. The Catholic Church had something similar as well.
Right.
But if it was the Eagles Club, then those elements weren't there.
So you kind of rose through the ranks, though. Is there was there sort of more of a religious role in your position as you kind of rise through the ranks?
Well, there's two different kinds of ranks. There's volunteers and then there's professionals. I came through the professional ranks, which was the admin, the people who worked behind the scenes to make sure that everything was in place so that scouting could happen. Membership drives, fundraising drives, things like that. I had very little of that had anything to do with religion, but I had to sign an application for every role that I took. And in that application, it says that I would be willing to do my duty to God.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So what type of organization is the Boy Scouts? Is it an independent organization?
Completely independent. It's a nonprofit. They received no government funds on purpose.
Right.
This was something that when I started back in the 80s was drilled deep into us in the organization, that we do not want to be beholden to the government. We do not want to. Yes, we don't. So we don't want the the government to come in and tell us you must do this or you cannot do that, as far as who can be our members, and that's been tested by the Supreme Court a couple of times, and the Boy Scouts have won every time.
So what is their main reason for doing that?
Mainly so they can keep out the people they don't want to be a part of it. Up until recently, that was homosexuals, that was trans, and it is still atheists.
So you were a believer at the time, though?
When I started, absolutely. I was a very faithful Catholic.
Mm-hmm. So were you a supporter of those policies then?
Yes, yeah. I hired a lot of people over time, and that would probably be the number one reason why I would keep someone from joining the profession, is if they didn't seem to have the religious strength to be in the organization, then I wouldn't hire them.
Religious strength, huh?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I remember when I was a believer, one of the big things that I never really got on board with was the relationship that religion plays with homosexuality. And I'm not sure that I really knew any people who were homosexual at the time, but I was just really, as a young person, it didn't sit well with me. I don't know if I like can see the way that people kind of carry that into adulthood. It might be kind of a generational thing.
It was fascinating when I first joined the profession. I went to my first professional training. I asked this question about why do we keep homosexuals out, and I remember specifically asking, is it because they're a danger to children?
Right.
And even then, this was 1989, and they said, no, it has nothing to do with that. There's no evidence that says that homosexuals are a danger to children. They just don't fit the values that we want to put forth in children. And I look back now, and it bothers me that that was a reasonable answer to me in 1989. I accepted that.
Well, I mean, it does make sense, though. And that's a very progressive take for them in 89.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah, because homosexuality was a mental disorder I think at that time. It's a DSM-3 or 4, and what I find interesting is that it is a legitimate argument if your worldview is this is a certain way to teach a religious life to children, and if this steps outside of that, I can kind of see the mentality there.
Well, it's interesting because the Boy Scouts, I think a lot of it was they were always very lawsuit fearful. So they did not want to make claims that they couldn't back up with a lawyer.
Okay.
So they would water down a lot of the things that they said to things like that. It doesn't fit the values of the children. I've heard that versions of that for just about everything, and it's just an easy way out. And the Boy Scouts have more lawyers than you can throw a stick at. So they and one thing I tell people too is they think that a lot of things the Boy Scouts do is illegal. No, they're very careful to make sure everything they do passes constitutional muster.
So what type of rumor is that, the illegality? Are there certain accusations that come up a lot from people outside the organization?
Well, no, I just meant along the lines of if they make some sort of a claim, they thought that children are being abused by homosexuals, they didn't want to be sued by a homosexual advocacy group or deal with bad publicity or something that comes along those ways. So it's just easier to make a milquetoast statement about values. Right.
No, I mean that you were saying that a lot of people believe that the Boy Scouts are doing illegal things.
Yeah, periodically, now that I live in a more secular world, they'll question me about, they said a prayer at our scout meeting. Is that legal? Can they force us to do that? And yeah, they can if you want to be a part of their organization.
Right.
It's a privilege, not a right, to be a member of the Boy Scouts, and they will. It is very unlikely. You can beat them in the court of public opinion, but you're very unlikely to beat them in a court of law.
Right, right. Do you know if there's a similar relationship between religion and government in the Girl Scouts?
No, the Girl Scouts took a very different tact in the early 90s. They dropped basically having an oath at all. Really, every individual Girl Scout troop can develop their own oath. There is a national oath you can look up, and it's very, very milquetoast. But they took out a lot of what the Boy Scouts would say was the teeth of their oath, which would say that you would do your duty to God and duty to country, and they became much more progressive a long time ago. And of course, back then we thought, oh, that's the end of the Girl Scouts. There's no way they're going to survive. They don't have any real values.
Right.
Heritage Girls came up not too long ago, which is an attempt to make the Girl Scouts a more conservative type organizations, but it's never really caught on. But the Girl Scouts got way in front of the Boy Scouts on a lot of these issues.
Yeah, because I remember being in the Girl Scouts and them having the oath from us, what we would say involved God as well. So there was kind of a clear message of this is, you kind of have to subscribe to this idea to be a part of it.
Yeah, and again, it depends on when it was, but you know, the difference is that could have been what your local Girl Scout troop decided it was going to be, and if you didn't like it, you could go to another Girl Scout troop that had a different oath. The Boy Scouts were far more dogmatic in that everybody follows the national model. Everybody follows what national says.
So the Heritage Scouts seems to be a branch that's more conservative and holds that Christian value much more sternly.
Yes, and I don't know a lot about them other than when I was in more conservative parts of the country, we saw them spring up periodically, but they never got anywhere close to the Girl Scout numbers.
So when did that come about? Do you know?
I think it came around 2000. It's been around maybe 20 years. I would have to look that up. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Do you know if there was something that kind of spawned that to happen?
Yeah, when the Girl Scouts took God out of their oath, a lot of religious organizations said, "Well, we want an organization that you know, for our girls to be a part of that has a belief in God." But the irony of that, with the Boy Scouts in particular, is that they don't define what God is. And to the Boy Scouts, they use the word non-sectarian. That means you believe in God, but we don't define what that means.
Okay.
That's why there are Muslim Scouts, and there are Hindu Scouts, and there are Rastafarian Scouts, and there's all kinds of different type of scouting organizations, as long as you believe in some sort of a deity. Now there are limits to that too. They don't take Satanists, and there's a couple of religions don't believe in doing their duty to their country, so they can't be scouts.
Interesting.
Jehovah's Witness won't take an oath to do their duty to their country.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating little part of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you were in the organization. It doesn't seem like you were kind of in the involved in the dogmatic part of that. You were sort of on the administrative side.
Well, the dogmatic part of that came from the national organization. I was we're all members of the national organization, but I was never a decision maker in that role. I always worked in the local councils. I worked in 4 different Boy Scout councils in the nation, and we received our marching orders from national, and that was our job, was to make sure that the volunteers and the families and the kids knew what those marching orders were and followed them as closely as we could. So
at what point did your atheism sort of start? Did that start while you were part of the organization?
Yeah, that's always the hardest part of this conversation. It's with most atheists. I can't pinpoint exactly. This is when I stopped believing.
Right. Yeah. It is difficult.
Yeah.
But like maybe kind of what kickstarts the doubt.
I have memories back to a teenager of having doubts. If I had to pinpoint one point in time, I remember researching a Bible verse for something that we were going to do in Scouts. I don't remember what the project was, and I ran across the Skeptic's Annotated Bible online, and it just grabbed me. And there was one particular section in there where it talks about where a slug melteth into the earth. And in the annotated part it says apparently they believe that slugs melted and weren't an actual animal back then, and that just hit me really hard, thinking, wow, how'd that make it into the Bible? The Bible's inspired and the Bible can't be in error, yet they thought this about a basic little animal.
So you were a literalist with the scriptures?
Not really. Catholics were never huge on that, but it's not so much a matter of being literal as a matter of being just dead wrong on the science.
Right.
How do you miss that? So that grabbed me, and then I just started reading, and I remember being amazed at every line has something on it that's not right, and throughout the Bible, I couldn't put it down, and that kind of started me just doing my research. I found the website about why does God hate amputees. And that's a classic website that's been around for a long time that talks about, if God heals people, why doesn't he heal people who come back from war missing arms and legs and things like that? And
serving God and country.
Yeah. So that those kinds of questions, but I kept it very hidden. For a while, I dealt with my doubts by I created a Facebook account for an atheist version of me, just to get out and talk to people, and I would just kind of put that hat on, and no one ever knew who exactly that was when I did it. In fact, the other day I tried to see if I could find that account back. I stopped using it at some point along the way, and I can't remember exactly the username and password I did, but it was just kind of a way to explore that side. But I had to put on the persona of being a believer to be able to stay in this organization.
Right.
In fact, at one point I was in one of the bigger Boy Scout councils in the nation, and my belief had gotten so watered down that I was picked to give invocations a lot. Now that sounds kind of weird, but the reason it is in the Boy Scouts, because they have so many different beliefs, they're actually very liberal in their approach to that, in that they don't want anyone getting up and mentioning Jesus or Allah. So you have to use very benign terms so as not to offend anybody when you say a prayer. Well, my belief was so little at that point, I could do it without any problems. You're real serious believers. They said, I'm not going to get up and pray without mentioning Jesus. And so I had the reputation of being a safe prayer. I could say a prayer that wouldn't offend anybody.
Yeah.
And I like hearing the sound of my own voice. So any chance I had to talk, I would get up and do it. And someone just the other day asked me to do a prayer for them to see, because they just couldn't believe that I could ever do something like that. And it was very easy.
That's difficult for me. Yeah, I volunteered at the Salvation Army a little while ago, a few years ago, and it was somewhere that my mom has volunteered for many years as a dental hygienist, and I was spending a few days there, and I guess they know my mom and she's religious, and so they sort of assumed that I would be religious as well, and it's a religious organization.
Yeah, it's a religion.
Right. The waiting room had this like Jesus spiel, like just very loud and prominent of this is the way that your life can get better. It's creepy. But what was interesting is originally they were going to have me do the intake of people asking for services, and they said that if they you offered to pray with them. And I had been an atheist for maybe like 4 years by then. And I was like, oh no, I can't do that. I was like, have me do something else. I cannot be this person. And it's funny because when you first come out of that religious mentality, sometimes you can put that hat back on, like you were saying, and you can kind of see that perspective and talk in that way. But I really, there's a point where I just couldn't even get myself in that mindset anymore.
Through the course of my career, and I also, before that, I was very active in the Catholic Church, and I saw prayer bring peace to a lot of people, including my own dying mother. So I see some value in it. It's a placebo. I don't think there's anything real going on there. But I had a mother who suffered from phantom pain the last few years of her life, and anything that would alleviate that pain, fake or real, I was in favor of.
Right.
So I don't have a problem with that. When people offer to pray for me, even when I tell them I'm an atheist, I thank them for that. You know, that's a hey, at least they're thinking about me.
Right. Well, and I guess it means different things to different people too.
Oh, absolutely. And some people use prayer as a weapon. And that's a very different thing.
Well, I just mean, like, for me, I think prayer was a very personal, one-on-one kind of thing with me for most of my life. So when the belief fell through, it didn't mean anything for me. So it was much less about community and praying with other people for comfort.
Oh, that's fascinating, because in the Catholic Church, prayer is all about a public display. And so that's, you know, when there was private prayer that was thrust upon us at times, and even as a believer, I hated that. I never could figure that out. How do you have this one-way conversation, and you know, and it never made any sense. But you know, as with everything else in religious life, when this jar is not very full, we'll just overfill the other jars. So do the service, go out and help people. That makes you a good Christian. You know, those little lies we told ourselves.
Right.
Atheist Edge. Walking the edge of what some consider offensive. But your feelings don't matter here, only facts. Edgy commentary on the dangers of doctrine, the foibles of faith, the bullshit of belief, the stupidity of superstition, and the idiocy of indoctrination. With razor-sharp wit, curiosity, and critical thought, we take an unblinking look at today's religions. We are Atheist Edge.